The sun rose slow and red over the auction yard, painting the dust like dried blood. The crowd had gathered before dawn, boots sinking into the churned mud, hats low against the heat. Horses snorted, wagons creaked, and the air smelled of sweat and with smoke. Men came to buy cattle, tools, sometimes souls. Today was one of those days. Elias Boone stood near the back, hat in hand, the brim worn to threads. His coat hung loose on him, his shoulders bowed from years behind the plow. The town had seen better days, and so had he. What little he owned was tied to the dying earth west of here, a patch of land that had stopped listening to the sky long ago. His corn failed, his well was shallow, and his hope came cheaper than feed. He hadn't meant to come to the auction, but the silence of his empty farm had pushed him here. The man on the platform shouted names, debts, prices. First came mules, then a wagon, then 3 goats that fetched more than they were worth. After that came something Elias wished he hadn't stayed to see. A girl. She stood barefoot on the plank, a slip of a thing dressed in faded calico. 19, someone whispered. The sheriff read from a paper, saying her father's debts had been called in, the house repossessed. The girl had no kin, no money, and nowhere to go. The law would place her, he said, until her debt was repaid. That was the word they used, placed. It sounded cleaner than what it meant. The men laughed low, the kind of sound that left a stain. Someone in the crowd called out, asking if she could cook, another if she could clean. She didn't answer either. She only looked beyond them, past the rooftops, as if the horizon might open and swallow her whole. The auctioneer's voice boomed, "Start $5. No one moved. The girl's jaw set tighter. 4, he barked. A hand rose, a rancher with gold teeth and whiskey breath. 3. Another man joined in, smirking. Elias's got twisted. He didn't belong among them, and yet he couldn't move. When the bidding dropped to 2, the girl's eyes flicked across the crowd, searching for mercy. They landed on him. He looked away fast, as if burned. He had nothing to give, not even kindness. But that look, quiet and fierce, half proud, half broken, stuck to him like burrs. The crowd laughed again. The rancher shouted his last bid, and the auctioneer lifted his hammer. Elias heard his own voice before he meant to speak. $2.50. The laughter cut off like a throat closed. The rancher turned, grinning mean. Didn't know you took to keeping house, Boone. Elias didn't answer. The hammer fell. The girl was his. She didn't cry. Didn't thank him either. When the sheriff pushed her toward him, she kept her head high. Elias handed over what few coins he'd saved, money meant for winter grain, and the sheriff nodded, tired of it all. You sign for her keep, he said. You feed her, shelter her, keep her out of trouble. 6 months, maybe less. She works her debt, then she's free. Elias nodded. Free. The word sounded wrong. The girl climbed into his wagon without a word. He took the reins and guided the mule out of town, feeling the eyes of every man burning his back. The road stretched wide and empty. Grass lay brittle, the color of old bones. Maeve, that was her name, the sheriff had said, sat stiff beside him, staring straight ahead. Her hands were red from rope burn, the faint marks of being tied for transport. Elias wanted to say something, but every word that came to mind sounded like an apology, and he wasn't sure she'd want one. They rode until the town disappeared behind them, and only the wind spoke. The silence between them grew thick as dusk. Elias cleared his throat once. Ain't much of a farm, he said finally, but you'll have a roof, food, and I'll see you're treated decent. She turned her head, eyes cold as river stone. You bought me? He met her gaze, steady. I bought you free of them. Her jaw softened, just a breath. There's a difference? He didn't answer. The mule trudged on, hooves striking sparks from the stones. By sundown they reached his land. The cabin slumped on a rise above the field, half the roof sagging, one window boarded over. The barn leaned like a drunk beside it. A windmill squealed in the darkening air. It wasn't much, but it was all that stood between Elias and the kind of hunger that made men mean. Maeve climbed down, eyes sweeping the place. You live here alone? Since my wife passed. He said it plain, without weight. 2 years. She looked toward the house, then to the fields beyond. The soil was cracked. The fence half collapsed. It looked like a graveyard of effort. She nodded once, almost to herself. Then you need hands. I need luck more than hands, he said, pulling the mule's harness loose. That earned the faintest curve of her mouth. Something almost like a smile, if the wind hadn't carried it away. They ate cold beans by lantern light. The only sounds of the ticking of metal cooling and the whisper of the prairie through the cracks. She asked where to sleep. He pointed to the small room beside the hearth, once meant for a child who never drew breath. He watched her stand in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint firelight, then close the door without a word. Elias sat long after she'd gone to bed. He listened to the timbers creak, to the wind pressing its lonely hand against the house. In the quiet, he thought of the faces at the auction, the laughter, the way her eyes had found him. He didn't know what made him speak. Mercy, guilt, something older. All he knew was that the world had one less cruel hand in it tonight, and somehow that had to count for something. He banked the fire, rose, and looked toward the shut door. For the first time in months, he felt the silence wasn't hollow. It was waiting. Outside, the prairie groaned beneath the weight of the coming storm. He stepped onto the porch, hat in hand, and watched lightning flicker beyond the hills. The smell of rain drifted close, sharp and alive. Behind him, he heard the faintest floorboard creak. Maeve stood in the doorway, blanket around her shoulders. Her voice was quiet. You didn't have to. Elias turned slightly, the glow from the lantern catching the tired lines on his face. I reckon I did. She looked out toward the field where the lightning danced, then back at him. You can't save everyone, she said. Didn't try to, he murmured. Just one. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still, the storm holding its breath, the land listening. Then thunder cracked open the sky, and the first drops began to fall. Elias went inside, and she followed, closing the door against the wind. The rain came hard through the night, washing the dust from the roof and the years from his heart. By morning, the air would smell of wet earth and new beginnings, though neither of them knew it yet. For now, there was only the storm and two strangers beneath one roof, bound by a choice neither understood but neither would undo. The rain didn't last long. By dawn, the air hung damp and heavy. The world hushed as if it had been scoured clean. Elias rose before the first light broke, the habit of an old life too stubborn to die. He stepped outside and saw the girl, Maeve, already in the yard, skirts damp with dew, hair pulled back with a strip of cloth. She was feeding the mule from a cracked tin pail, her movements careful, efficient, without expectation of praise. He watched her a moment before speaking. You don't need to start so early. She didn't turn. Neither do you, she said softly, almost to herself. There was no malice in it, just truth. He nodded, took up the axe, and went to split wood. The rhythm of the day began without them deciding it should. The thud of the axe, the creak of the pump, the wind brushing through brittle stalks that once had been corn. By mid-morning, the sky had opened wide and clear. The smell of wet dirt rose thick from the fields. Elias and Maeve moved through the chores in a silent rhythm. She scrubbed the pans, hung the laundry, and swept the porch, while he worked on the fence, hammering loose boards back into place. When their eyes met across the yard, there was no tension, only something unspoken. Two people caught in the same stillness, unsure what to make of it. The days fell into pattern. Elias spoke little, his voice rusty from disuse. Maeve didn't pry. Yet every small act, her mending his torn sleeve, his leaving a tin of biscuits by her door, became its own quiet language. Trust was slow to grow, but was growing all the same, like the first green shoot daring to rise from stubborn soil. One afternoon, a shadow crossed their fragile peace. A horse approached from the east, hooves kicking up dust along the dry creek bed. Elias wiped his brow and watched as a man rode in, broad, red-faced, grinning like he owned the world. Roy Cavanaugh. He swung down from his saddle, boots thudding against the dirt. Didn't think I'd find you keeping company, Boone, he said, glancing toward the cabin where Maeve stood half hidden in the doorway. Heard about that auction. Folks been talking. Elias's grip on the hammer tightened. Don't much care what folks say. Roy chuckled. Sure you don't. Still, a man buys himself a young girl. People are bound to think things. Ain't right, maybe, but the world's got eyes. Maeve stepped onto the porch then, chin lifted, gaze hard. You can tell the world it's got no business here. Roy's grin faltered for a heartbeat before returning meaner. Feisty. Careful girl. Pride don't feed you. He turned back to Elias. You watch yourself. People remember things come winter. He climbed onto his horse and rode off, the laughter trailing behind him like smoke. When the dust settled, the air between them felt heavier than before. Maeve didn't move. Elias went back to the fence, but his hands trembled. That night, Maeve spoke first. He thinks I'm your sin. Elias stared into the fire. He thinks too much. You could have told him what I was, that I work for my keep, that it's nothing else. I shouldn't have to explain myself to men like him. She studied him a long while. You shouldn't have to, but you will. He looked up then, eyes dark in the firelight. You afraid of what they'll think? Her jaw set. I've already been bought once. What more can they take from me? The silence that followed was long and sharp. Elias reached out, turning the log in the fire, sparks jumping into the air like fireflies. You can stay, he said finally, voice low, as long as you want. No one's going to touch you here. She didn't answer, but when she stood to leave, her hand brushed his shoulder in passing, brief, accidental, but enough to leave him frozen long after she was gone. The next morning, the wind shifted east. Clouds rolled in from the hills, dragging the scent of rain again. Elias found her behind the barn, mending a tear in his work shirt. She glanced up as he approached. You should fix the roof. The shingles are near gone. He nodded. After I fix the pen. You can't do both before the storm. Then I'll do one and pray the other holds. She hesitated, then said, I can help. He wanted to refuse. Habit told him she'd done enough. But the honesty in her eyes stopped him. All right, he said simply. By noon, they were both on the roof, hammering side by side as the wind picked up. The sky dimmed to the color of pewter, and thunder murmured in the distance. Maeve worked with steady hands, unafraid of height or weather. A sudden gust lifted her hair, and Elias caught a strand against his sleeve before realizing what he'd done. She froze, eyes locked on his, neither of them sure whether to pull away. Then lightning flashed close, and they both turned back to the work. The rain struck before they were finished. It came in cold sheets, stinging their faces, soaking through their clothes. They laughed then, unthinking, breathless, two drowned souls trying to beat back the sky. When the last shingle went down, Elias drove the hammer home and let out a shout that turned into a rough, boyish laugh. Maeve laughed too, the sound bright and alive, cutting through the storm. For a fleeting moment, the weight of the world lifted. Inside, dripping and shivering, they built a fire and stripped off their soaked coats. The light flickered over them both, turning the small room gold. Maeve wrung the water from her hair, cheeks flushed, eyes brighter than he'd ever seen. You laugh like a man who forgot how, she said. Maybe I did. She smiled faintly. Maybe you should remember more often. Something warm stirred in the quiet, fragile and dangerous. Elias looked away first, feeding another log to fire. The storm rumbled against the walls like a warning. Later, when the thunder moved farther east, Maeve sat at the table sewing by lamplight. The needle flashed, her fingers quick. Elias watched her in silence, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the faint hum she made without knowing. He thought of the empty cradle in the next room, the ghost of laughter that used to fill the space. For the first time, he wondered if the land could still give back what it once took. Maeve looked up, sensing his eyes. What are you thinking? He hesitated, then said, that maybe some things grow again if you wait long enough. She set the needle down. And some die no matter how long you wait. Their gazes held, neither yielding. Then she rose, carrying the mended shirt toward him. This'll last you another season, she said, if you don't tear it fixing what's already broken. He took it gently. You think everything here's broken? She shook her head. Not everything. Just you. She turned and walked to her room, leaving him with the shirt and the echo of her words. He stared into the fire, feeling something inside him shift like dry earth after rain. Outside, the storm broke into drizzle. The windmill groaned, the land sighing as if relieved. Elias sat alone, turning the shirt over in his hands. Every stitch was small, precise, made by someone who still believed in repair. He hung it near the hearth to dry, then looked toward her closed door. A soft light glowed beneath it, steady as a heartbeat. For the first time in years, he didn't dread the morning. The storm had passed, but something deeper had begun, a fragile peace neither of them trusted yet, but both of them needed. He blew out the lamp and lay down, listening to the rain fade against the roof she'd helped mend. Somewhere between the crackle of dying fire and the whisper of the wind, he found himself praying. Not for crops, not for luck, but for the courage to deserve the quiet now growing between them. The summer came harsh and lean. The sun blistered the fields until they cracked like old skin, and even the wind carried dust instead of mercy. Elias rose each morning before the heat could settle, tried to coax life from soil that wanted none of it. Maeve worked beside him without complaint. Sleeves rolled to her elbows, skin darkened by the sun. They had fallen into a rhythm of quiet understanding. He mended the fences. She tended the garden, and between them stretched something that wasn't quite peace, but close enough to breathe in. One evening, as the day bled into a bruised sunset, a distant rider appeared along the ridge. The sight of him froze Elias where he stood. A tall man on a black horse, coat dark as the horizon behind him. He didn't move fast. He came slow, deliberate, like someone who already knew the way. Maeve saw the tension harden in Elias's shoulders. "You know him?" she asked. Elias shook his head. "Not yet." The man dismounted before the porch, tipping his hat with the kind of charm that always hit a blade. "Evening, friend. Name's Jed Sloan. Don't mean trouble. Just water for my horse, and a bit of shade if you got it." Elias hesitated, measuring him. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Maeve stood in the doorway, her hand tight around the broom handle. When Jed looked her way, something cruel flickered across his grin. "Well now," he drawled, "if it ain't little Maeve Holler. Didn't think I'd see your face again this side of God's forgiveness." Her knuckles whitened around the broom. "You lost your right to speak my name when you betrayed my father." Jed chuckled, stepping closer. "Betrayed? No, girl. I just didn't hang for his mistakes." Elias stepped forward then, planting himself between them. "You had your drink. Now be on your way." Jed tilted his head, still smiling. "Easy, farmer. Ain't looking for trouble. Just passing through. Besides, I reckon I could share a story or two. Seems your girl there ain't told you what kind of man her old man was." "She's not my girl," Elias said evenly. Jed's eyes gleamed. "Maybe not yet." The air thickened. The silence felt sharp enough to cut. Then Elias said, "You'll have your water, and then you'll go. No stories." Jed's grin faded. "Suit yourself." They watched him lead his horse to the trough, drink deep, and settle by the fire pit without asking. Maeve turned to Elias, voice low. "He was my father's friend once, until he sold him to the sheriff for $50 and walked away with his blood on his boots." Elias said nothing. The fire cracked between them, throwing light across her face. The old pain there carved deep. "He won't stay long," Elias finally said. But he did. Jed lingered past nightfall, spinning tales of outlaws and gold, his voice slick and poisonous. He spoke of Maeve's father as a thief, a liar, a man who'd earned the noose that never came. Maeve's face burned red with anger. "You weren't there," she snapped. "He stole because you took everything first." Jed smirked. "We all take what we need to live, sweetheart. Your daddy just weren't good at hiding it." Elias's patience cracked. "You've said enough." Jed stood, shadows flickering across his face. "Careful, farmer. There's a lot you don't know about that one you brought home." Elias didn't answer. He stepped closer, close enough for Jed to see the iron in his eyes. The outlaw lifted his hands in mock surrender, then turned to his horse. "Fine. I'll find friendlier company." But before mounting, he looked back at Maeve. "Don't forget, girl. The blood in your veins don't wash clean. Then he rode into the dark, leaving the smell of whiskey and dust behind him. The fire hissed low. Maeve stood trembling, her face half lit by flame. "He's lying," she said quietly. "My father wasn't perfect, but he wasn't evil." "I believe you," Elias said. "You didn't ask for proof." "Don't need it." Her eyes filled, though no tears fell. "He was desperate, that's all. The drought took everything, and the law took the rest. He tried to keep us alive. They called him a thief, but all he ever stole was a little time." Elias nodded, the words sinking deep. "I know what it's like to steal time from a dying thing." That night, neither of them slept. Elias sat at the table cleaning his old rifle, the one that hadn't been fired since his wife's death. Maeve sat by the fire, staring into it until dawn came pale and thin. By morning, a new shadow fell across the yard, a sheriff and 2 deputies. They looked worn, dust-covered, and short on patience. The sheriff tipped his hat. "Mornin', Boone. We're tracking Jed Sloan. Rode through here last night." Elias didn't move. Might have. Didn't stay long. "Did he say where he was headed?" "No, sir." The sheriff studied him. "That man's wanted for robbery and murder in 3 counties. You see him again, you send word." His eyes drifted toward the cabin. "That the girl from the auction?" Elias's jaw tightened. "She works here." "She's got a temper," the sheriff said, almost kindly. "Best keep her from drawing the wrong kind of attention." When they rode off, Maeve stepped out from behind the door. "You lied," she said. "I did." "Why?" "Because that man would hang Jed, and I'd rather the news come for someone who's earned it proper." Maeve stared at him. "You risked yourself for me." "I risk myself for what's right," he said, though the line between the two blurred more each day. Later, the wind carried hoofbeats again, this time distant but coming closer. Elias loaded the rifle, eyes scanning the horizon. Maeve joined him on the porch. "You think he's coming back?" He nodded once. Men like him always circle back to what they've broken. When night came, the moon rose sharp as a blade. Elias sat with the rifle across his knees, the air heavy with waiting. Maeve moved quietly through the cabin, lighting one lamp, then another, until the room glowed soft in gold. "You shouldn't stay up," she murmured. He looked at her, seeing the tired strength in her face, the fire that no man had managed to break. "I've got more reason now than sleep." She sat beside him, and for a while they listened to the wind hum through the grass. Then she said, "I used to think all men were cruel, that they took what they wanted because the world taught them nothing else. But you," she paused, "you don't take. You hold back." Elias turned to her. "Holding back's the only thing that's kept me human." She smiled faintly. "Maybe it's time you stopped." Before he could speak, the dog started barking, low and guttural. He stood fast, rifle raised. Out past the gate, a figure moved, slow and certain. Lightning split the clouds, revealing a horse and the man atop it, Jed Sloan. Elias's pulse steadied. "Stay inside," he said. Maeve's hand caught his sleeve. "He won't stop. He'll come for you. For me. Then he'll find I ain't the same man he left here." He stepped down into the yard, the sky boiling with stormlight. Jed's voice carried over the wind. "Didn't I tell you, Boone? Blood don't wash clean. You harbor her, you wear it too." Elias leveled the rifle. "You want her, you'll have to come through me." Jed laughed, the sound swallowed by thunder. "That's the plan." Then the first drops of rain hit the dirt, fat and cold. Lightning flashed again, and both men vanished into the dark between beats of thunder. Maeve stood at the window, heart hammering, watching the shadows move across the field. A gunshot cracked, echoing off the hills. Then silence. She gripped the window frame until her nails broke the wood. Another flash of lightning tore across the sky, but the yard below was empty. Just the rain, falling steady, washing the dust from the earth. The storm had come again, and with it, the reckoning neither of them could outrun. The rain fell hard through the night, turning the earth to mud and the air to mist. Maeve stepped out into the gray morning barefoot, her dress clinging to her knees, the cold cutting through her like memory. The rifle lay near the porch, half buried in muck. Beyond it, the field stretched quiet and colorless. Elias was nowhere in sight. She called his name once, twice. The wind swallowed it whole. Then she saw the tracks, 2 sets of prints leading toward the ravine, one dragging slightly as if burdened by weight. She followed them, each step sinking deep, her breath sharp in her chest. At the ravine's edge, she found him. Elias lay against a rock, hat gone, blood dark on his side. Jed Sloan was slumped a few feet away, eyes glassed over, rain dripping from his chin. Both had fired. Only one had lived long enough to regret it. Maeve dropped to her knees beside Elias. "You fool," she whispered. "You damn fool." His eyes fluttered open, weak but steady. "You all right?" "You're asking me that?" she said, pressing her hand to the wound. "You're bleeding through." He caught her wrist, faintly smiling. "Not the first time I've been shot for a woman." Her throat tightened. "Don't talk like that." "Can't help it. Words come easier than breath right now." She tore a strip from her skirt, pressing it to the wound. "You'll live." "Maybe." His gaze drifted to sky. He came back mean. Said I'd taken what was his. Guess he couldn't stand the thought of a man like me protecting what he couldn't. Maeve looked toward Jed's still body, her face unreadable. He had a chance to leave. "Men like him don't leave," Elias murmured. "They circle, looking for someone to blame when the world stops listening." The rain softened into mist. The sun fought through the clouds in thin, golden strands. She helped Elias to his feet, slow and careful, his weight heavy against her shoulder. Together, they made their way back to the cabin. Every step felt borrowed from fate. Inside, she laid him on a bed, the one she'd slept in since that first night of storms. He winced as she cleaned the wound, but said nothing. Silence filled the room, thick as smoke. "Maeve," he said after a while, "you could leave, you know. Go start over somewhere the land's kinder." She looked up sharply. "And what about you?" He gave a faint shrug. "I'm a rancher. My roots are here, even if the ground won't have me." Her eyes softened. "You think you're cursed." He chuckled weakly. "Ain't we all?" She leaned closer, voice trembling. "You didn't buy a wife, Elias. You bought a second chance, and you're too stubborn to see it." He studied her for a long moment. The fire popped in the hearth, throwing orange light across her face. "You talk like you've forgiven me for everything I ain't done right." "I have," she said, "because you tried." Something broke in him then, not the kind that bleeds, but the kind that frees. He reached for her hand, and she let him hold it, fingers trembling together like leaves in wind. For the next few days, he healed slow. Maeve tended the wound, cooked what little they had left, and mended the torn fence outside. She didn't speak much, and neither did he. But in the quiet, something unspoken grew between them. Something gentler than the land that raised them. Something truer than the lives they led before. By the 4th morning, Elias was on his feet again. The air smelled of wet grass and smoke. He found her outside, hanging clothes on the line, hair loose in the breeze. "The sheriff will come looking soon," he said. "I know. He'll ask what happened to Jed Sloan." She pinned a sheet and turned. "Then tell him the truth. That I killed a man, that you saved a woman." He studied her face, saw no fear there, only resolve. "They'll still want answers." "Then I'll give them mine." Sure enough, the sheriff rode in before noon, hat low, eyes wary. His men dismounted, scanning the yard. "Heard gunfire 2 nights past," the sheriff said. "Found Sloan dead in the ravine. You know anything about that?" Elias met his gaze. "Steady. He came here looking for her. I told him to leave." "He didn't." The sheriff looked to Maeve. "That true, miss?" She nodded. Jed Sloan was no man worth burying. He was a ghost come back to haunt what he'd already ruined. The sheriff sighed. "World's full of men like that. I'll write it down clean, self-defense, far as I'm concerned." "Appreciate that," Elias said quietly. As they rode off, the dust settled slow, the air finally still. Maeve stood beside Elias, watching the horizon. "It's done," she said. "For now." She turned to him. "You always think there's another storm coming." He smiled faintly. "That's how I stay ready." She took his hand then, unexpected but certain. "Then I'll be ready with you." The day stretched long and quiet after that. The ranch breathed again. Crows circled high, their cries sharp against the endless sky. Elias fixed the corral, his movement steady, the ache in his side fading with each swing of the hammer. Maeve brought him water, her eyes catching the light when she smiled. That night, they sat together by the fire, the silence soft instead of heavy. She rested her head against his shoulder, and he let her. Outside, the coyotes sang far away, their cries carrying over the hills like a hymn. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Once," he said. "Long time ago." "What stopped you?" He looked at her. "Didn't have a reason to stay." She smiled, a quiet kind of knowing. "You do now." He nodded slowly. "Reckon I do." The flames crackled, painting the walls with gold. For the first time in years, Elias felt the weight in his chest ease. Not gone, but lighter. Maeve's hand found his, fingers intertwining, warm against the calluses. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of new rain, but not the kind that destroys. The kind that wakes the earth back to life. And somewhere in that wild, unending silence, the past loosened its grip. The land still bore scars, but also held promise. A promise stitched together by two souls who bled enough to understand what it meant to endure. When the last of the fire burned low, Elias whispered, "You should sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." She looked at him, eyes soft. "So everyone after it. But I don't mind if they're with you." He smiled, slow and tired, but true. The kind of smile that comes when a man realizes he survived more than just a fight. He survived himself. The rain began again outside, gentle this time, tapping against the roof like a lullaby. In the quiet that followed, the world felt almost new. Elias Boone sat there long after Maeve had fallen asleep, watching the fire fade to embers. And for the first time in years, he didn't dread the dawn, because come morning, the ranch wouldn't be lonely anymore.